there, it's Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder here with this week's episode of the Market Monday. So this week I'm just going to keep it short and sweet and give you my financial analysis on the Kaldheim Mythic. So this is always a good time to be looking at cards when they come out. The rule of thumb is always that cards will inevitably fall. There is some cases where cards are underpriced when a set comes out, but inevitably when people start drafting the set or just start cracking it to find those chase cards, especially the foil versions of the full art, when the collector's editions start getting cracked, these cards go down in price. But they do tend to recover long term if they do see play in various formats and especially Commander. So that's what I'm going to focus on in this video, is look at their impact on how well I think they're going to be accepted into the Commander community, what kind of decks or the meta with Commander or the archetypes in Commander they fit in. And we're also going to look at Standard, as well as are these cards good enough to go into something like Pioneer or in Modern. So let's just jump into it with Kaldheim. So first of all, we have this set that's coming out with just some crazy prices. $425 for the full set of Kaldheim is quite high. If we have to actually check that with Zendikar, you saw it was very similar to with Zendikar, and there's a huge bump down, which ends up happening with the value of the expected, or just the price value of a complete set of a brand new set. It just tanks for probably even more, like 6, 7, 8 months before it starts to recover. We can actually even look at Throne of Eldraine, same thing. Throne of Eldraine came off a lot weaker than this. Well, maybe not. Maybe at its peak. It was 445, and then it went down all the way to 266, and then it had its real low all the way on May at 202, and now it started to recover to 264. The good news with Magic the Gathering is Magic the Gathering has fared a lot better than I thought it was going to at the very start of 2021, and that's a good sign for Magic. It's a good sign for Kaldheim. It's very healthy with the Commander. It's actually still pretty decently healthy as far as kitchen table is concerned with building paper decks for cards that even see play in Standard. I think that if the late 2021, if we can get back to GPs and start having more in-play paper, we can see some of the cards start to go up in value from these older sets. I don't think that that will be enough time for something even like Kaldheim, as far as Standard cards are concerned, to start creeping up in value. We're going to have to wait till rotation for that to happen. Now, that's another interesting topic for another day, to look at the power level of some of these Zendikar Rising cards and the power level of Kaldheim. And if we do have a resurgence back into paper play or competitive play, there might be some opportunity for making a quick buck for cards that do survive rotation that will have some playability after rotation. Now, the one thing that really holds true with Standard at the moment is Throne of Eldraine is king. Throne of Eldraine is the bulk of cards that are being played. All the other good cards that were impactful are, well, even Throne had a lot of banned cards, but cards even like Euro that could compete with Throne cards, they got axed, and now we are having just mainly a Throne of Eldraine meta with things like Mono Red and Gruul, with the key pieces being from Throne. And I think the meta gets really shifted, and there are some very powerful cards that are in Zendikar Rising especially that are being pushed back from Throne of Eldraine. The sad part, and again, probably the wrong part for this kind of rant here on a financial video, is the sad part is we're never going to see some of these really fun cards from Ikoria or Theros ever see the light of day in Standard, because of just how powerful Throne was. And that's just something I find quite sad, because if there's anything that saddens me more than anything else in Magic the Gathering, it is when a fun synergistic card just cannot compete in the Embercleave and Yorion and Great Henge dominated format. So anyway, let's go ahead and jump into these Mythics. We're just going to take a look at the Mythics here, and I'll give you my thoughts on these Mythics and how I feel they're going to settle. So the first one here at $40 is the Vorniclex Monstrous Raider. This is 6 mana for a 6/6 trample haste, and if one or more counters on a perimeter player would be placed, put twice that many on each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. And if opponent would put one or more counters on a perimeter player, they put half that many on each of those kinds of counters on that perimeter player, rounded down. So unless it has 2, if it's 1, then it gets rounded down to 0. So it is kind of a pretty powerful card in Commander, because that is going to affect Planeswalkers as well, because those are counters, or loyalty counters that go on Planeswalkers. So it can kind of shut down the +1s or the plus abilities for opposing Planeswalkers and it's going to make your planeswalkers do a lot more. There are many combos throughout the history of Magic that just require planeswalkers ticking up a couple times. If it is with something like Vorniclex, then you're going to be able to get to those ultimates very, very quickly. This is going to be something that's going to be very popular with Infect. It's going to be popular with there are a lot of artifacts that put charge counters on things. There are +1/+1 counter strategies that could go with this doubling up effect. That I think this card is going to be quite popular. Now, I think that as far as the analysis is concerned for like standard or modern, I find this card to not really be where some of these decks want to be. This is a type of effect you probably want very early to happen if you're going to get more counters on things. The Trample and Haste does make this card interesting for decks right now, but if you look where it would fit in, if you're looking at food with a 7/6 that can recur that has Vigilance and Trample, this is a very similar thing. If you are looking at something like Gruul, it's probably too top end for this card to actually want to come down. It's competing with things like the Elder Garganoth that might just be strictly better with the ability to pump out creatures or draw cards or gain life. And the Trample, I guess the Haste does kind of make this it is definitely playable for standard, and probably not going back in something like Pioneer and Modern unless you get really into Wombo Combo land with being able to get this out, cheat this out, and then have these abilities start to take effect. But just a 6/6 body for 6 mana with even Trample and Haste has been outclassed lately by cards. So where I think this will shine, and where I think the price tag of this is going to hold true, is most green decks are going to want to utilize this for Commander. I think that's going to be a very popular Commander. It is definitely a build-around Commander. Like I said, charge counters, Infect, +1/+1 counters, Planeswalkers. It's going to be a little bit tough to make a Planeswalker deck around this as your Commander, but any deck that has a Planeswalker-oriented theme is going to want to throw Vorniclex if they're running green. Another card deck that is extremely popular that I do believe is going to want to throw this in is going to be Atraxa. Atraxa continues to be a top 10 Planeswalker of all time. Some of these other ones too, that there was an M19 Sultai card that works off of triggers or permanents triggering multiple times. That's another one that I think could use Vorniclex. So I don't think that Vorniclex's $40 price tag is that far off. I'd be very surprised if it crashes. I mean, it could easily get halved, but long term, I do think this is going to be a $40 card. I think it's going to have the same demand as stuff like Eldrazi's. It's very easy to throw in Commander decks, and it does remind me of things like the Great Henge that do have some. I know Great Henge is double dipping right now, but Great Henge is something that Great Henge is actually something that started off pretty low. This was very surprising that when it was pre-selling, that people didn't give this card the credit that it deserved, and now it just has a substantial amount of play in multiple formats, and actually has a lot of play in Commander. It's very easy to cheat out and just have a huge draw engine. That a lot of times these type of cards sneak up on you because there isn't a lot of investment here on this early end or people picking up that copy, and then so it allows for these cheap copies to get into decks, and then those get stripped out, and then all of a sudden there's no copies for people that want the card, and the people that have the card aren't selling it, and then you have this effect of where it just really goes up in price when the supply does run out. So we sell a ton of these cards, for example, at my store to Commander players, predominantly Commander players. I'll sell these more to them because Standard is something that people are only playing on Arena at the moment. So I don't know. I really do believe that Vorniclex is something that is reflecting true demand right now and isn't like being overhyped for what it can do. And so I'm pretty bullish on this card long term. The next one is the Orvar, the All Form. So this is a change. Let's bring it up here for a little bit better of a picture here. It's a changeling for 4 mana for 3/3, and whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, if it targets one or more other permanents you control, you create a copy of that permanent. When a spell or ability an opponent controls cause you to discard this card to create a copy. That's a copy of target permanent. So at least you get the copy effect if your opponent's forced you to discard a card, which is kind of interesting right now in Standard. You'd have to proactively have something else out though before it got discarded. If they just ripped it out with like any other card, like I'm thinking Agonizing Remorse doesn't rip it out. It makes you exile it, so it wouldn't work against that. But we're thinking something like the the Croxa, if you pitch it to that, then you could copy something. You'd have to have like a curve that actually would work around that. So as far as competitive play, this is one of those cards that actually looks super, 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 super good. And then you get it into kind of the real world of where does this actually take effect. And it does take a little bit of setup. It's got to survive an entire turn before it can untap with mana, and then you can start getting a lot of value out of this card. However, it does get very interesting with a lot of cards that can then give something hexproof. There are quite a few cards like Museum Skin, for example. This does say whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, if it targets one or more other permanents you control, you create a token that's a copy of one of them. I guess so you have to choose between if you do choose multiple targets with one spell. But there are some interesting things, even like Ranger's Guile in like a green-blue tempo type shell for competitive sake. In Commander, I also do like this card. I think that it is a build-around card, but I don't think that the price is going to be able to reflect how much this card is going to see play. It's not something you can just shoe in like Vorniclex into any deck. It's not going to have so many archetypes they can fit in. So this one I'm a lot more bearish on. I do like the card. I like the design of the card. I think the implications of the card don't reflect like a $25 Mythic. Now, I could be proven wrong if this card, people do establish a lot of synergies that can go along with this. Yeah, it can definitely get out of hand very, very quickly. Like I said, you start throwing those hexproof cards on cards or anything that like draws a card. There are plenty of cards that even like target creature gains flying until in turn draw a card. Boom, throw it on that. You copy whatever creature. You start getting a lot of ETB effects off of those type of cards, and then pretty soon you've just outvalued your opponent. But there are plenty of other cards. I'm even thinking of like that. There's the one that copies instant sorcery spells when you cast it, and then it copies one for other creatures. Like those ones were so overhyped. They had huge price tags coming out of the pre-release or the pre-order prices, and then they fell down to basically nothing. So we have these all the time in new sets that come out that people hype up, that they think are going to have a lot more implications than they end up having. Doesn't mean they're bad cards, doesn't mean they're less powerful in the right shell, but that's the key word. It does take the right shell to throw this card in it. A 4 mana for a 3/3, just look at the scenarios right now in Standard. It's not going to do much against Yorion. Yorion's going to have other effects that just exile it. And then there are going to be, it's going to be very, very tough to protect it at that point. And then, getting Embercleave down or Rogue. There's just not a lot of places this would fit, even in Standard at the moment. Alrighty, let's go on to the next one, which is the Valkyrie God of Lies. This is one of the cards that I'm the least excited about, but I think the price tag is very, very overinflated because it's another card that you just have to look at the scenarios. I get what they're trying to do with these type of cards. So this is, the Kaldheim is now having the version of what Zendikar did with lands. But sometimes when you have like a can opener also be a cheese grater, you just get an inferior cheese grater and an inferior can opener. And what you really wanted was a can opener that really did its job well, or a cheese grater that grated the cheese to perfection. This one is kind of a weaker version of something that you could do. I mean, I guess the effect is unique enough, but for 2 mana, what I don't like about this one is with, again, scenarios. There are some matchups this is going to be really good against. The Valkyrie God of Lies then just has to survive a turn, and then you still have to pay the converted mana cost of that creature. So it's one of these scenarios, again, that you're going to everything's going to have to fall in line perfectly. You cast God of Lies. They have a creature in their hand, possibly like a 1, 2, or 3 drop. Then the next turn you can actually cast. I get it, like late game too, you can drop this, maybe rip something out. That's assuming people have stuff in their hand. And yeah, it's very, very awkward. So when enters the battlefield, each opponent reveals their hand. For each opponent, exile creature card. They're revealed this way until Valkyrie leaves the battlefield. Think about that in Commander. People hate having their stuff being taken, so this is something that 2/1 that could easily just be taken care of. I get it. You have like mana vaults and things like that can ramp up mana. You can feel like some sort of way to cheat out some cards. But again, it's a lot of scenarios that really have to align for this card to be good. If we actually look at the flip side of it, same thing. It's a 7 mana walker where it's a 5 loyalty, you +2, you exile the top card of each player's library. It doesn't go from their hand, it goes from the top of the library, so it's not a resource lost. And then you can cast spells. You can place cards, exile with Tibalt, with any mana to cast those spells. But again, this has to survive an entire turn. You didn't take away a resource of an opponent. You didn't progress your own board. it was 7 stinking mana. Compare that with Ugin, which is 8 and colorless, which exiles everything one-sided, and then you can start ticking it up, and then eventually draw cards, or at least have a lightning bolt every turn. Exiling target artifact or creature and then having 2 loyalty left. Yeah, possibly you can exile that creature, then cast it the next turn, but for 7 whopping mana. And in a color combination too, that I guess this could go into like a Grixis deck, but typically this is something that's going to be hard to protect and hard to get a lot of value out of it. So even if you're casting something, say you've exiled your opponent's best threat and the next turn you cast it, does their threat actually work with what you're trying to do? So let's say you exile someone's questing beast. Is their questing beast then, as you cast it, it can be possibly a blocker for the next turn? Is it going to get any added value off of you having an Embercleave or you having a Great Henge? These are the type of things you have to really take in consideration when you're looking at cards. When theory crafting with them is how are they going to play out on paper. Let's take the commander scenario again. So you exile the top card of each player's library, and then you have to have the 7 loyalty planeswalker somehow survive an entire turn unless you've had a lot of mana rocks and things like that. And at that point, you might as well just cast an Ulamog. And that's where I'm kind of going with this particular card. I have a hard time seeing where it's going to fit and justifying the price tag for this card. I think this is going to be one of those that really drops in price, as it's going to be, as I described earlier, it's going to be something like a multi-tool that actually none of the tools are superior to something that already does exist. All right, so let's go back to the next card is the Halvar God of Battle. So this is one that I do think does fit currently in Standard. Whether or not that it wants to be in that deck, it is on curve. That's the exciting part of this card. So Halvar God of Battle is that sort of toolbox feel that I was, or the Jack of all trades, master of none type card, with it being an equipment on one end and a creature on the other. So the equipment, and they can work off each other. That's what's kind of cool about these cards is the Sword of the Realms can work with Halvar. So you can cast as the Sword of the Realms, then cast a Halvar, and possibly have this already equipped to a creature, and then it's also going to get double strike. So it gives +2/+0 vigilance, and when it dies, returns to its owner's hand with an equip cost of 2. It's a very reasonable equipment. Is it on the power level that we need cards as equipments at the moment? Is it like a Skyclave or an Embercleave at this point? That has yet to be seen. It does get very interesting throwing Sword of the Realms, but it doesn't immediately equip. I think that's what a lot of people are getting from this Skyclave Maul, is the immediate equip, and then the value off of then being able to, it feels like a Rancor. This one, the equip cost though is very reasonable. It does give vigilance, doesn't give flying first strike, gives +2/+0, doesn't give that 2 toughness. All of those things are very relevant. But when it does die, you get to return it to its owner's hand. Where this one gets more interesting is like throwing it on Elvish Visionaries and Solemn Simulacrums, or even another one. It's kind of interesting to throw this on is the Alisade. So the 1/1 that can give protection, or the 1/1 that can give indestructible. These are the type of cards that are kind of interesting with the Sword of the Realms. The other upside, if you have equipments in the deck, like if you have multiples of this, the Halvar is also interesting with giving double strike to your creatures. So at the beginning of each combat, you may attach an R equipment, so that's a way you can get something back onto another creature, and they do work off each other. Like if you are going in that scenario with those dogs or the enchantments that enchantment creatures allow you to give protection to something, then they die with they're equipped the Sword of the Realms. You can cast them again, and then you can immediately on combat equip it again. Possibly that could be a scenario that has like a Skull Clamp type feel to it. But none of these type of effects, I think, are where the converted mana costs for either of these want to be in comparison to something that already does exist. Is a 4 mana 4/4 that has the possibility of giving something double strike going to be better than just what are they playing right now? Even like in this slot, like a Lurrus is a 4 mana spell where you cast a Lurrus, then you get back something out of the graveyard to cast again. And that might have more value than the Halvar. It doesn't have indestructible. It's something that can still be taken care of quite easily. But again, I do like this one the most because it does seem to have some synergy in Standard at the moment. These type of effects are typically lackluster in Commander because going like a Voltron type strategy, or it's kind of the meme that white and red have a million ways to just go kind of big with creatures, just to balls out aggro against stuff. And people are looking for other ways. It typically isn't like the best way It's not the most popular way, nor is it typically the best way. It's just these type of cards make enemies very quickly. Then you get targeted. But it is a fun little god. I think it is a little overinflated unless this one does really hinge on being a competitive card rather than really wanting to go into some sort of equipment base. And there's so many equipment decks in Commander at the moment that maybe you're like, well, it could go in this deck and this deck and this deck and this deck. And does it want to have a home in those equipment based decks? Probably. But that will take years to get like this mythic up to the price of a $17 mythic. Whereas a card like Vorniclex that is going to be shooting into everything is going to justify its price tag a lot quicker. So I'm bearish on Halvar, kind of bearish and bullish. It really stems on the competitive scene. The Goldspan Dragon, this is an interesting card because it's going to work off treasure tokens. We just had a set that created treasure tokens with Commander Legends. We just had Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan. They tend to put treasure tokens in things. It's funny with this card because they created a treasure token in this set that was called, what was something ice, like ice shard or something that does the exact same thing. And I'm like, just makes me like facepalm. It's like, you couldn't like have all of your treasure token type cards be named the same thing so they could synergize off each other. Just it's a kind of a pet peeve there. But this one is very interesting. A treasure control have sacrifice this artifact, add 2 mana to your mana, 2 mana of any one color instead of 1 mana of any other color. There are a lot of cards already that from Ixalan that have started to go up in value. They work off treasure tokens. I'm thinking that this one's going to be quite popular. The problem is that the body on this is, I think people would prefer this to be an enchantment or an artifact rather than a creature, but it's still quite good with all of the treasure type decks that are running around in Commander. Competitively speaking, Flying Haste 4/4 is fine for a body. You get 2 mana. It has to survive to have the 2 mana left over, but it's a little bit lackluster for what it does for a 5 mana slot for Flying and Haste 4/4. So I think this is more on the Commander level. It is going to be very popular Commanders, but I don't see the price tag right off the bat being at this price tag too. This is another one I think is just destined to go down in value in the short term. Now we are on to the next one. This is Kaya the Inexorable. This is another interesting card. When I was comparing this one to a card right now in Standard that already exists, it's just strictly worse in my opinion than Elspeth Conquers Death. I think Elspeth Conquers Death does more. It's easier to protect, at least to get to its third phase of getting back your creature from your graveyard. So the modes on this one is the 5 loyalty planeswalker. The +1 is to put a Ghost for encounter on a creature, which when that creature dies or is put into exile, you return to the hand and create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So you are able to proactively protect a creature for when it does die. It can work in like a sacrifice-based effect, so you can sacrifice a creature, get it back to your hand. That's where I like Kaya the most, is in those type of black-white sacrifice type shells, which also can give you a silver bullet versus your opponent's stuff. The ability to exile target non-land permanent is very, very good because in this format, that's Great Henge. Great Henge is actually something that's can be a little bit rough to deal with, especially with some of these decks trying to use Ugin, and then Ugin can't get the Great Henge because of the 9 converted mana cost. The -3, though, leaves it quite vulnerable to a lot of cards that can then deal with it, but it is what black and white does want. 5 mana is going to be the big... Is it going to be able to justify its slot? I think it will. I think it does feel like Ashiok power level at this point. And Ashiok isn't the most played card, but it definitely does see enough play. But it's also not going to be an expensive card. I mean, what is Ashiok? What's Ashiok out of at the moment? So we have Ashiok the Dream Render. Is that the one? No, Ashiok the Dream Render. That's a good one. Ashiok. What is the Ashiok that I'm thinking of? From Theros Beyond Death is the one. Nightmare Muse. Okay. So this is very similar. This one returns target on permanent owner's hand, and that player exiles a card from their hand. So very similar 5 mana. They're creating a 2/3 that proactively mills. Very similar. The ults are very similar. And then there you go. You can see the price tag. So I would say that both of these are very similar. And I mean, they can both be bounced by Yorions. Like Yorion doesn't even prefer Ashiok at the moment. Some do, some don't. But Same thing with Commander. Commander, I do like the ability of Kaya in Commander, but it's going to be another run-of-the-mill Planeswalker at this 5 mana that ends up being a bit lackluster for what it ends up doing. The Ghost form is also, it is interesting, the +1, but yeah, very comparable. I think it's a very good comparison between Kaya and Ashiok, and the price tag will probably follow suit with Kaya the Inexorable. Next up, we have the Battle Mammoth. Now, this one is something that I just don't like. I don't think that this card is as good as this price tag suggests. A 5 mana 6/5 is competing with so many things in Standard right now, and when a permanent control becomes a target of the spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. That's an interesting effect. These effects have been on other cards in the past. Yes, you get a card immediately when it's destroyed. Is it better than something like it's directly competing with the Elephant, the one I just named earlier, that creates a 3/3, draws a card, or gains 3 life? Yeah, you can make the whole the argument that this one is more likely to draw you at least one card. Doesn't have vigilance, which is actually very key because the Mammoth is actually used as a kind of a mirror breaker right now, and this one doesn't fit that bill because it's just going to be a 6/5 for 5. I mean, the mana cost is this card would be good definitely pre Throne of Eldraine, but post Throne of Eldraine, I don't see it getting there. Rotation could be another story, but we'd have to wait and see what cards are it's competing with it. Yeah, because most of those slots do, because Elder Garganoth does. So let's compare it with Elder Garganoth real quick. And that was a card that actually did see. Yeah, so this one will rotate. It does have a $14 price tag, but it's from a core set, so it did go up quite a bit of value at first. But 6/6 Vigilance, Reach, Trample, and then has all the abilities when it blocks. So you can actually get more value out of this if you can attack multiple times with it. And then this other one's relying on your opponent's actually, like, usually you would remove this threat first. You would remove the Battle Mammoth first before then targeting, so you get one card out of this. The Foretell cost is also interesting. I've yet to play with Foretell to see how well it's going to work, because you can do this, you lose your second turn or your third turn to then make your fourth turn be able to get out a little bit quicker of a creature. And that might be good with Great Henge, because then you could go turn 4 Foretell, and then the following turn you can get a Battle Mammoth out, or even like a Gilded Goose. That scenario could happen a turn earlier. Yeah, it's not going to really happen with another. It would have to be a Gilded Goose, because you'd have to Foretell on that specific turn 2, and then turn 3, you'd be able to cast it, and then Great Henge on turn 4. So not quite sure that's where the green decks want to be. You do draw a card, but do decks really care at the moment of allowing like a Gruul deck to? They're already really good at drawing cards. You need to just stop the pressure and stabilize yourself with going bigger, going a heavier control shell to deal with the threats at that point. So yeah, Battle Mammoth is also one that I'm not sure like Commander players are going to be too interested with it. It's just another big dumb green creature that does have an ability, and there are a dime a dozen at this point with tons of different abilities. So this one, I don't know. This one is yet to see how it's going to fit in like a competitive Standard of where it's going to fall. The Sika, God of the Tree. This one's another interesting one. This is another card I can't stand because it's got these cheat into play abilities. Is on one side, it's got a 1/4, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and other legendary creatures also can add a mana by tapping, so it gives those ability, which is interesting with certain commanders to give them the ability to tap for mana. One that I'm thinking right off the bat. But it couldn't go in because of the flip side of this being 5 colors. That's going to actually make it quite weird with what decks it can go into with Commander. So it's going to be very, very restrictive in Commander. So I actually don't like it. I like the price tag for that very reason. This backside, though, is very interesting, though, because at the beginning of your upkeep, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker card and put that card on the battlefield. It's another way to cheat in some high converted mana cost cards like Ugin. But this would have to just be a one of in a specific deck. So the only deck that I could foresee this going into at the moment that would want to cheat out an Ugin, yeah, and then if you are just running one particular, like if you want to guarantee that card, yeah, that's probably the wrong way of looking at this. It's just going to give you some some value. It is very interesting though for like Cultivate. Cultivate can get all the mana you need for the Prismatic Bridge. There are plenty of other cards that can ramp it out. So it most likely will see play in Standard. And the flip side of this isn't bad with a 1/4. A 1/4 body is actually quite good because it survives most of the removal right now no, I guess it doesn't. It doesn't survive Heartless Act. I'm trying to mull this over right now of where this would work. It does a good job of like blocking mono white and mono red though, and then does get you towards casting the other end of the enchantment. But typically 3-mana mana dorks have never fared well because their curve is just so weird. You're curving into like a 5-drop, but your 2 and your 1 could also do that, and your 2 and your 1 can go into 3s and 4s, and your 3 can't do a 3 or can't do a 3 or 4 obviously. So interesting with other particular cards. I wonder how well that enchantment's going to fare in something like Modern. It does take an entire turn before you start to get value, and then you can just, if you're running like other mana dorks, you can just hit those. So I think this one's a little bit overhyped at the moment for what it does. I typically don't like the design though because it might lead to some busted stuff, and I just don't like that. Anyway, does allow you to cast the other side of, at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker, put the card on the battlefield and the rest. So can you do both sides? Judge question on these particular ones. But I mean, I guess it's a legendary enchantment. So I'm like, if you hit another Azika, you could just get another one, but it is legendary. So they must have thought that one through. I don't know. So this one I think is probably a little bit overinflated. So now we're already down into mythics that are below $10. The first one is Tavar Kel, which allows your elves to add for black, and then put a +1 counter on one target elf, untap it, it gains death touch until end of turn, and you can create a 1/1 elf warrior creature, and you get an emblem with whenever you cast an elf, it gains haste until end of turn, you draw 2 cards. It's a really, really, really cool idea for Elf Ball, and the problem with it can't be your commander, so you would have to have a black-green elf be your commander, which typically right now there are a couple of them. I mean, I can already think of like Marin that can be used one. I mean, there's some very reasonable ones that can be used as a black. Noth of the Guilt Leaf could be one. And this does do most of what you want to do with elves, except for the fact that the thing you really want to be doing is that -6, and that's going to take a little bit of work to get to. It does allow your elves to add for black to your mana pool, which, yeah, that means your elf tokens can do so, which does get very interesting in these elf ball type decks that then create tokens that then have haste and they can add black, but then black is going to be quite awkward to then cast even more of them and kind of ball off is the terminology we like to use for it. So this one might be more awkward, but it does have it going for it. It is a very, very popular tribe with elves. It creates them. And he even gives +1. It even untaps an elf. There's a lot of elves that can generate a ton of mana, so you untap it with it. So I think it's going to be something that is going to be added into many elf ball shells, but they have to be running black, and that's another thing I think is going to keep this card down. As far as competitive play in Standard, it's very awkward. I mean, what do you have? Best case scenario, 4 mana, you get a 1/1, and then hopefully that gains death touch until the turn is quite weird. Like putting a +1 counter on an elf, untapping it against death touch until the beginning of your next turn would have been much more appropriate because then it would have been able to protect the card. So I think it falls flat on that level, but it should be an interesting enough card that it might be able to justify. I still think $5-6 is where this one's going to settle. Alrighty, so we have the Koma, the Cosmos Serpent. So this one is this spell can't be countered. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 3/3 blue serpent creature token named Koma, and then you can sacrifice another serpent to choose one. Tap target permanent, and this one gains indestructible. So it's something that you can then start. You can keep this guy alive, and then start tapping things down. You create a bunch of them in upkeeps. It's a 3/3, a 3/3, a 3/3, a 3/3, a 3/3. There's going to be some standard decks that are going to make this card work, I would assume. It actually doesn't seem like a terrible card to get off of the Genesis Ultimatum, or if that fact just like hardcast it instead of relying on Genesis Ultimatum. So you just end up ramping into it, hardcasting it, and then you can get a bunch of 3/3s that eventually take over the game. In 1 versus 1, you're getting 2 They each up keeps you a 3/3 and a 3/3, and one of those is actually going to have like haste for the next turn. You kind of compare that with like Terror. I actually think this is another mythic that already does have a home at the moment, but is it just better? Well, definitely if you're not going Shark Tornado, Shark Typhoon, then this card is probably a better slot for that. I think it's better with that particular Terror the Peaks version, because the getting into 7 mana is not hard at all for that deck, and it is something they can take over the game quite quickly. And yeah, that can't be countered is exactly what that deck wants. So I do like this card, but it's probably pretty reasonable where it's at. You don't want a lot of copies of this, I would assume, because it'd just be clunky in your hand. I guess with putting something like the Fire Prophecy, you can ditch the other ones to the bottom of your library, so that makes it more interesting. But it definitely is there. It's what a deck currently in Standard wants as an option. And so I do like it for that reason. So it's not going to be like a bulk mythic. But in Commander, it's also pretty decent too, because he's created a ton of blue serpents. And these type of like, think of the Ophiomancer. That's a card that continues to go like have a decent price tag. So Coma could go that route, other than this is still another one that's a very clunky type card. It's kind of awkward for a Commander. I don't know if it does enough for it. Tapping a permanent and its activated abilities can't be activated. This turn is kind of neat for a Serpent. You can kind of shut people off. I don't know. This is a pretty decent design. I think it will settle somewhere between that $5 and $7 range, depending on playability. The Nico Aris. So this one, when enters the battlefield, create X shard tokens, and then so it's an X Planeswalker spell. You can sacrifice it and then scry one, then draw a card. It's interesting with being able to proactively put out a lot of card draw. So you cast this late game, and then you can spend 2. It's almost like creating a bunch of tomes, Maze Mind tomes. Up to 1 target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Whenever creature is damaged, return it to its owner's hand. And then -1 is it deals 2 damage to target tap creature for each card you've drawn. 2 damage to target tap creature for each card you've drawn this turn. So it can sort of protect itself. You can cast it for just 3 mana. And -1, you can create a shard token that can then just draw cards. Interesting card. Is it where blue-white wants to be with like the Dream Trawler? You're going to get 2 damage to something. It goes to a 2. The +1 is very awkward, though. That's what this card is very, very awkward with. Is it seems like you're going to get some value out of putting in this X mana to get some shards. It is kind of interesting that these are enchantments. I wonder if there's some decks that can get some value off of creating a bunch of enchantments out of one spell. But it is like, this is a niche card. It's going to have to find its little stride. The 2 damage per card drawn. Yes, you draw another card. I get it. You sacrifice a shard. You can do 4 damage to a tapped creature. Tapped is a liability at the moment, though. That is something that doesn't work versus something like Questing Beast. There's a lot of other vigilance creatures at the moment. There's a lot of cards that flash in, and if they choose not to even attack in at that point, there is something that the Nico Aris can't deal with. So it'll be interesting where this one settles, though, but I do think that it's a little bit high for its price tag. Alrighty, so that leads us to Toroth, the God of Fury. So this one's a 4 mana, trample whenever creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage. It deals damage equal to excess to any target other than that permanent. So it is the way for your spells to get a sort of trample ability off of them. So it's non-combat damage, so you think of things like lightning bolts. Right now, it is interesting with Planeswalker because there are some spells that typically or can only do damage to a Planeswalker, can't hit opponents at this point. And then this would allow them to hit a Planeswalker and then hit an opponent with excess damage. Allows like your Shatterskull summons or Shatterskull passings, whatever it's called, that card that you can throw X into, to then be able to, pump in even more damage. And say you want to kill a 6/6 and a 1/1, then that 5 damage, or you just target 2 1/1s and do 6 damage to them and then have that damage. I mean, it doubles that damage. It's very interesting, but I don't know if it's what deck would actually want it at the moment. Like Gruul is the one that I think would want this over like mono red, because they have access to a lot more spells that I think want to be a lot of their creature removal spells can then be used to deal excess damage to a opponent at that point. The 5/4 body for 4 mana is quite reasonable with trample. The backside of this is going to be a hammer. So the Toralf's Hammer, which says equipped creature has unattach it, deal 3 damage to any target, and then Toralf's Hammer gets returned to its hand. So there's an equip cost of 2, so it's 4 mana to do 3 damage. The equipped creature is +3/+0 of its legendary. So there are some legendary creatures at the moment, like the Annex, that would be interesting to put it on. Questing Beast would make it interesting to put it on. And that is all that I can think of at the moment that is being utilized in heavy numbers in Standard. For Commander, it does get interesting too. It's another interesting Commander to build around, but it's more likely the cards that go in the deck will have a higher chance of going up than the card itself. And I don't think it's going to have enough play to justify its price tag again. It is a very interesting card. Yeah, that's kind of my analysis for this guy. The 5/4 trample is quite reasonable though. But again, you look at mono red and you have the 2/4 that doubles the damage. They compete with the slots there. You're competing kind of with like Embercleave's slot at that point. It gets interesting with those 1/1s though. It gives them ability to turn them into bolts and then, or at least get some value out of them when they get a clogged up board. Alrighty, so then it brings us to the Starnheim Unleashed. The Starnheim Unleashed is Starnheim is a $6 card, creates a 4/4 white angel warrior creature token with flying and vigilance. If this spell is foretold, you create X tokens instead. So you're going to want to foretell this card early, and then you pay double X. So for every 2 mana, you get a 4/4 angel token. Not a bad card to play in like a control-based shell. You can set this up, and then you're going to be paying. So you're going to be paying 5 mana for 2 4/4s. You'd be paying 7 mana for 3 4/4s. They do have flying and vigilance, and so on and so forth. It is kind of an awkward card, though. I mean, 4 mana for a 4/4 angel warrior creature token, flying vigilance. It's just an under like it costs less than a Serra Angel, so it's just a token that flying vigilance. Yeah. So it has an upside, but most likely you do want to foretell this for like 5 mana for 2 of them and whatnot. It'll be interesting to see where this falls in line in Standard. It's kind of an awkward card because you have a land that can do a similar thing that for 7 mana you create 2 of them and gives things indestructible. That is one for 7 mana you get an extra 4/4, but how much at that point does a control deck need 3 rather than these cards have typically seen play though, like White Sun Zenith. I'm comparing it to that. White Sun Zenith being an instant speed. You can just you can end a turn and then untap and attack with it. This one you have to cast on your turn. A lot of ways to deal with it right now, with converted mana cost getting exiled and taken care of. I don't know how I feel about this card. It definitely will see a home. In Commander, this is a little bit better because you can throw a ton of mana into it. You are foretelling it, but it's just another run-of-the-mill card. There are many, many cards that do very similar things as this one. Alrighty, so let's go on to the Alrund, God of the Cosmos. This is a 5 mana for a 1/1. This is the card that I think I like the least. It gets +1/+1 for each card in your hand, and each foretold card you own in exile. And beginning of your end step, choose a card type, then reveal the top 2 cards of your library. Put all cards of the chosen type in your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library. This card's kind of cool if you can get it out and protect it. It's going to get you, hopefully, a card at the end of the turn. There are so many cards like Gadwick the Wizen, though, that you can, right there for, you get 2 cards right off the bat for 3/3 that then you can start getting value. Yeah, this one is like a Phyrexian Arena type card. It's going to miss some of the times. The back end side of it's a 2/3. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, returns your hand and then scry 2. So where they kind of have this idea with this card is you put out a 2/3 that they can be a blocker and trade with most things right now. And eventually, if you want to then turn it into a 5 or into a god to start drawing you cards, there you have it. So I might actually be missing the mark with this particular card of how well it's going to work. Unfortunately, there are a lot of ways to deal with the 2 mana cost card, and then just for the 1 mana spell with the black spell, the Heartless Axe still kills it. Fire Prophecy kills it. and you haven't really done much. You can't block a elemental, you can't block a questing beast. It's gonna get, you know, beat down by basically another creature. A scavenging ooze just on one counter is gonna be able to go through this. It is a 2/3 though. Like, it does do a great job chumping, then being able to set you up. So maybe that will be its saving grace here with it, is to put out that 2/3, put out that kind of bump in the road, allow you to stabilize, allow you to then flip it, and allow you to draw cards at a reasonable rate. So right now, though, it is competing with a lot of things that just do that better, with like casting a couple cards that mill some cards and then into the story for 4, and you have a bunch of proactive threats instead. That's where I'm kind of looking at this particular card. But so far, none of these cards I think have hit that bulk mythic. All right, so now let's go to the Quakebringer. Quakebringer is your opponents can't gain life. Commander players are already like that. It's got a 5/4 body. That's reasonable. During your upkeep, it deals 2 damage to an opponent. This ability triggers only if Quakebringer is on the battlefield or if Quakebringer is your graveyard and you control a giant. This does get kind of interesting in like a self-mill type strategy. There already is one in Standard that does use the Bone Crusher Giant. So the scenario could be you self-mill it with something like there's the Timurit. Calls the Dead. This goes in the graveyard. You have a Bone Crusher Giant out. It's going to do 2 damage to opponent each turn that it's still in your graveyard. The Foretell just reduces it to a 4 mana. I don't think that's what like Red wants to be doing. It's definitely going to be a situational card. This kind of feels weird to the Mythic. It doesn't feel Mythic to me. So I think the price tag for this one's definitely not going to be a $6 card. All right, now we have the Valkyrie. The Valkyrie is flying, lifelink, hexproof from Planeswalkers, and a 4/3 with a bow, sacrifice a creature, each opponent sacrifice a creature or Planeswalker. This card, I actually do think gets a lot better with Rankle out of the mix, and it actually does play a different role than Rankle. The hexproof from Planeswalkers, there aren't a lot of Planeswalkers. There are 2 that are coming out in this, well, 3 of them that could have dealt with it from even this set. And the flying lifelink for a 4/3 for 4 mana still, though, is vulnerable to the 3 mana for the Fire Prophecy. The Boast is very interesting in like a sacrifice deck. So it has to attack, and then you can do it. You can sacrifice a creature, and then each opponent has to sacrifice a creature. And Boast can be used during combat. So you attack and then you boast, and then you can get something. Yeah, this is very reasonable. It does seem to be something that could work in the right shell. Now, is it just going to be a shoe-in? There's a lot of competition with this slot in Standard. It's definitely not good enough for like Pioneer. The lifelink is definitely interesting in this aggressive strategy, like this aggressive meta. And same thing with making an opponent sacrifice a creature or Planeswalker. That's something too that is interesting too in some of these black, more aggressive base strategies. So I do like this card. Well, it'll be interesting to see where this goes, but typically even things like Rankles don't go up much over the $5 price tag, even if they see play. So right now, these cards of the Quakebringer, the All-Around God of the Cosmos, they're already showing like the best case scenarios of where these prices will be, giving the situation of these cards. They're not strictly just better than what exists out there. You're gonna have to make some choices for these cards, but all in all, they're all decent cards, which is great for the set because we haven't seen like just such a stinker of a card yet. The Alrund's Epiphany, 7 mana for create a 2/1/1 blue bird creature tokens with flying and take a turn after this one, and then you exile the Alrund's Epiphany. Foretell makes it be cast 1 less. Typically, these take extra turn cards go up in value. This one, I'm actually bearish or bullish on this one because there aren't a lot of take extra turns right now that are accessible for Standard, and they're accessible based on price. And this is something, 7 mana for take extra turn. Yes, you can already take 2 extra turns for that, but it's just another take extra turn. These typically do well when they're printed. So I can see this one actually going up in value, believe it or not. Alrighty, so that brings us to the last one, which is the Burning Rune Demon. And this one states, when the Burning Rune Demon enters the battlefield, you may search your library for exactly 2 cards not named Burning Rune Demon that have different names. If you do, reveal those cards. An opponent chooses one of them, put the chosen card in your hand, and the other one in your graveyard. So it's a 6 mana 6/6 that then goes and gets you typically what you want to see. Like, I actually like this card, and that could be something that could be, I don't know if format defining, because 6-man is very, very rough in these particular formats with you're dead by half the decks, like rogues, mono red, Gruul. Those things are gonna. You've had to stabilize. I don't know at that point like what a 6/6 does, but this does get interesting in many decks that do want to go the distance. You can name something that wants to be in your graveyard, like a Kroxa, for example. You have a 6/6 beater. Then your opponent, you name two different things that want to be in your graveyard, basically, an Ox and a Kroxa. Your opponent has to put one of them in the graveyard. You get the other one in your hand. Hopefully they get value in your hand. There could be other cards too that I'm not thinking of at the moment. Like a deck that I have right now might actually want to top end with this, because I can go get something like I can get two things: a skeleton and a zombie that want to be in the graveyard, and then at least I'm starting to build up my graveyard at that point. You can also go get some really high impact cards where you give your opponent like this, the kind of damn if you do a scenario of which one you get to then curve into for like a 7-drop, for example, or 2 removal spells like a midnight or I can't think of the knight that kills a planeswalker, or something that makes a sacrifice of planeswalker. So if you needed to get rid of a particular thing, there's a cool toolbox feel to this one for sure. And I think Commander players too that do want to utilize their graveyard, I think this is going to be a popular choice. So it's going to be interesting with the price tag of this, but I think this one too could go. It definitely, I don't think this card will go up in value. Like $4 is quite reasonable for this one. All in all, though, I have been pretty impressed with the Kaldheim. I've been impressed with the power level too. There wasn't any of these cards that looked just like, this is going to require a ban. There are some rares that I'm not too happy with. We'll have to talk about in another video. But this one being more, financial analysis related, I hope this is a good video for showcasing this. Kind of a long video, really rambled on this one, but I hope you liked my insight. And we hope you enjoyed this video. This has been Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder for the Market Monday. Thanks for watching.